I think we should move on to the issue of housing. The high cost of living in Darwin is a very big issue in the Territory, and one that affects a lot of people, particularly high rents and house prices. Do you still believe your policy of 100% loans will help this situation and not make it worse?
Look, Louisa, it's up to 100%. Now, a lot of people will obviously be able to put some equity in. The problem we have at the moment is that we have many people out there renting who are paying more in rent than they would need to do to pay for a mortgage on that same property. The reason why they can't save for the deposit is because they're paying high rent, and the banks now want up to 20% of a deposit. So it's virtually impossible for somebody to save $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 to actually be able to get a mortgage on their first home. That's why we've introduced this scheme. But what about the RBA
economists have come out saying schemes like this one put upward pressure on house prices? I mean, people might not be defaulting on their loans, but what about the issue of increasing house prices?
Well, look, the RBA, to be fair, was not specifically commenting on our scheme in our circumstance here in the Northern Territory. Everybody knows that we've got more land available than ever before. We've got 2,700 units and apartments ready to come out of the ground. This scheme will run for 2 years whilst we wait for the financial markets to return to some sort of stability to allow people to borrow in terms of normal borrowing patterns. I think it's absolutely the right thing for government to do where there is market failure, and there is market failure at the moment. There's no shortage of capacity for people to repay the loans. What they can't do is get the deposit together. And Louisa, over 1,000 people are beating the doors down at the TIO trying to get access to this scheme. And that's 1,000 people, if they're successful, who will be buying their own homes, freeing up 1,000 rental properties in the private market.
But, I mean, you have to admit that you've failed to get this balance right. The government saw this problem happening years ago, and you were hesitant to release more land, and you've admitted that you were hesitant to release more land because of fear of property prices falling for those people who own property. I mean, it is a fine line to get right, but you must concede that you failed to get it right.
Look, you know, it is a really fine balance here, Louisa, but what we have done going back 3 years ago was accelerate the fastest land release in the Northern Territory's history. You drive around Palmerston now, there is more land to purchase than has ever been available before. You drive down Lee Point Road and have a look at Muirhead. There's more land than ever been before.
But should it have been turned on? I mean, it takes a number of years for it to be turned on. Shouldn't it have happened a lot earlier?
Look, nobody foresaw what was going to happen with the global financial crisis and the fact that the world capital markets were going to absolutely freeze up, including a bit of a delay here in the Northern Territory. So we've put this scheme in place. It'll be in place for 2 years. And as I've said, 1,000 people beating down the doors of TIO. Land developers are flooded with applications, and this scheme will get people into the market, off the rental roundabout, freeing up those rental properties, decreasing the pressure on rents.
Terry Mills?
Yeah, I think the Chief Minister has overlooked some key issues here. The first one is that I distinctly remember 2007 standing in that Parliament and calling out, for goodness sake, get on with the show of releasing land. And I can clearly remember Delia Laurie saying, no, all you want to do is to flood the market and to drive house prices down. There was already in play was the possibility of increased development in the Northern Territory, and the most important thing you need is a place for people to stay. Resisted that, and then started to make change in language in 2008, and then raised false expectations of people started to see the prices moving, and then moved in that direction with the glossy brochures and the like to increase the expectation that something was going to happen. And it's 2012 and there are thousands of properties short.
There's one part of your narrative there, Terry, that you have totally overlooked, and it was called the global financial crisis. Remember the global financial crisis?
Yeah. Well, that's
People weren't able to borrow money. Developers weren't able to borrow money. Home owners weren't able to borrow money. That's why construction activity stopped. That's why we've got big holes in the ground all over Darwin, where developers have got their developments approved, ready to go, and the banks, instead of wanting 60 to 70% pre-sales, to finance that unit development. The banks wanted 100, even 110, 120% pre-sale. So Terry, you know, your narrative misses a very important point that rocked the entire world, and it also affected us here in Darwin.
I'm really glad you raised the global financial crisis. Do you know what caused the global financial crisis? Cheap loans, getting people into the marketplace.
Terry, let's just fix this.
Caused it.
In the United States, they were lending money to people with no income, with no job, and with no credit history. CIO will only loan money to people who have an income, have a job, have the capacity to repay the loans, and have a credit history, Terry. So you know, your version of
I'd like to go back to a
certainly
question I went to earlier, and going back to the campaign here. How much of it? How much of a setback was the Ken Bowers incident to your campaign?
That's right. That was a question you didn't want to answer before.
Your top men stood down behind the scenes.
Look, you know, that was very disappointing that happened, Louisa. I feel really sorry for Kenny Bowers. He made a mistake as a young man, but I think all of us as men, putting ourselves into that situation that Kenny found himself as a young fella of 20 or 21 years of age, could certainly understand what happened there. In terms of my staff not immediately acting on a decision that I made, that was certainly unfortunate. It was certainly a very grave mistake made by my Deputy Chief of Staff, and I stood him down for the campaign. Now, of course, I wish that wouldn't have happened. I've stood him down for the campaign.
He's still being paid?
Yes, of course he's being paid. He hasn't been sacked.
Well, Terry Mills, one of your political advertisements this week disclosed letters spelling out Hendo is a jerk-off. Yeah. And you laughed this off. Does this show an act of desperation in your campaign?
No, not at all. Not at all. And just one part of the narrative missing there is, yes, OK, Kenny, fine, you know, people do make mistakes, but what I find unforgivable is the manoeuvring of your outfit under your leadership and yourself, Paul, in attempting to put pressure on the media to control this story. That is the big problem here. And adjusting the story and applying pressure on the media was a very big problem. And adjusting the story, that's code for not telling the truth. That is a serious problem. So most people knew about Kenny.
I didn't.
Oh, you didn't?
No, I didn't.
Right, well that is very surprising. Very surprising. You'll have to take your word for it.
I'm surprised you didn't know that, because it ran for 4 days. I certainly did not know that Kenny had that indiscretion behind him.
How is it that so many know, but the head of the party doesn't know?
Well, it's true.
Hard to believe.
I didn't know.
Hard to believe.
Let's move on.
It certainly wasn't. No, it wasn't known by the public.
I think we should move on to issues more important to Territorians.